right, heroes, just about to get started with today's edition of the Jew Curious Show, connecting all the pipes to the internet. Be right with you. I'm going to have my face on the screen here in a second, and just going to let some folks on Twitter know where to find us, and I'll be with you in just a moment. But you should know that today's topic is multiple genders recognized in classical rabbinic literature. That means that, you might think that, gosh, the world was such a simple place with just two genders this whole time, Adam and Eve, the whole business. And just now things are getting complicated. We're recognizing multiple genders, and that feels very untraditional. But you should know that even as far back as the Mishnah, going back almost 2,000 years, there have been, in rabbinic literature, multiple genders, at least 6 that we have careful documentation of, going back, again, about 1,800 years to the time of the Mishnah. And Judaism has always had a more open perspective on that than you might expect. So, in just a moment, we're going to begin our live stream. I will take whatever questions you are able to ask in the chat. I do suggest that if you want to join us in the chat, even though we are multicasting on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live, a great place to get into the conversation is on the Twitch platform. So all you got to do, and I think there's a link in below this video wherever you're watching it, go to Twitch, Twitch, as in an involuntary muscle reaction, twitch.tv, as in television, twitch.tv/Jew Curious. And that's just like it's spelled here in the Jew Curious show. So twitch.tv/JewCurious, and get into the chat there. That's the easiest one for me to watch of all the 3 streams we're following. So, in any case, really glad to have you here today for this show. I'm going to take a little sip of my coffee, then I'm going to turn on the camera. Here we go. That's good move juice. All right, let's turn on the camera. It's only fair. Welcome once again to the Jew Curious Show. I am your friendly neighborhood rabbi, John Carrier, and been doing the Twitch thing. Been doing the Twitch thing for, about a month, I guess, few weeks. Been doing the Jew Curious Show for going on a year. I think it was a year ago this month that we dropped the first episodes of the Jew Curious Show podcast. That's a podcast you can find on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Places, Google Places, all the places, including Google Play. So if you want to hear 30-plus episodes that we have, check that out. People have been asking me, gosh, John, it's been a couple of months since you dropped a podcast episode. Do we have any more coming out? The answer is yes, we do. Have a couple of great conversations recorded. Some more conversations coming up that I want to share with you as well, so stay tuned for that. But over the year, we've sort of branched out into live video on Facebook, mostly on YouTube Live. And lately I've been doing that on the Twitch platform just because it's the least buffery for the non-technical people. There's less lag between the movement of my mouth and the sound that's coming out of it, and people being able to respond to questions in the chat and things like that. I think it's the best live streaming platform out there right now. Not as dominant as YouTube, but better technically. So whatever's better for this community to learn in, that's what I want to go to. Nevertheless, got a lot of good friends on YouTube. Been making videos on YouTube for, since I've been a rabbi, about 5 years now. And a lot of great people there. So if you're watching this on YouTube, if that works for you, Gegesund, as they say in Yiddish, you go on with your bad self. But you are invited to join the chat here on Twitch. And it may require you to sign up to Twitch if you haven't already. It takes seconds. It's the easiest new account creation thing I've ever done. So go ahead and sign into Twitch. And one more quick thing before we get rolling. If you're on Twitch and you haven't already done this, I humbly request that you follow this channel on Twitch. So if you're watching on the Twitch platform, I'm in a little video box just like the old Tubaruba and the old television set. Right above the video, there's a little button. And in my platform, it's purple. So I think it might be purple where you are too. So there's a little purple button that says follow. Got a picture of a heart shape on it. Click that button, and what that does, it helps us build this community. We've got about 38 followers so far. We're closing in on 50, and if we get 50 followers, that allows us to unlock certain features so that this channel will just work better and better for the community that's here learning together. So if you haven't already followed us on Twitch, go ahead and follow us on Twitch. I'm just going to run the traps real quick, make sure this is working on Facebook and YouTube as well. Before we get started, again, this is not something they teach you how to do in rabbinical school, so so I'm still working out all the bugs. Let's see. So go ahead, just talk amongst yourselves, if you will. I'm going to keep the music on, just to have some beats in the background. And I'm already happy to see Cara Amelie is here. She says, hey, hi, here before the class. Awesome. KG Wilcox is here, says, hi, everyone. Cara Amelie says, I like the Twitch platform. I do too, Cara Amelie. So thanks for throwing in your voice here. Everybody is welcome here. If you're just lurking, you don't feel like chatting, that's cool too. You do you. But I would love to hear from you. Let me know what your name is. Let me know where you're coming from. You don't have to give me your address. I'm not going to stalk you, but I like to know what part of the country you're in, or what, like, city, state, that sort of thing. Country. We get people tuning in from Southern California here where I am, from Florida, from the East Coast, from like the Northeast coast, the New England does. It's a wicked pissa when somebody comes in from New England. Get folks, KG Wilcox is here from the Philly area. K Dixie says, just waking up in California. God bless. Cara Amelie coming in from MI. I think that's Michigan. I think that's Michigan as opposed to the Ministry of Intelligence or something from, MI5 or MI6. So here from Michigan. So we're in the middle of the country as well. We get folks tuning in from Cyprus and Thailand and Germany and places like that. So Michael Pacheco says, hi, hey y'all, speaking my language, hey y'all, from Colorado. So welcome, Michael, glad to see you. I'm just going to go check with my friends here on Facebook to make sure this is working. And away we go. So we got some folks here. Scott Wessel gave me a thumbs up. One of my favorite all-time rabbis, Scott Wessel is. Let's see. So we're live. It appears we are live on Facebook. Just going to check if you don't know what I'm doing, I got my phone out. This is very awkward, I'm teaching a class and I got my phone out. Just going to check the little YouTube Aruba. Are we live? Yeah, we've got a bad thumbnail. Still working on getting the right thumbnails in there for YouTube. It says Weekly Torah Bahalotecha, or Bahalotcha. That was last week's Torah portion. But the title is Jew Curious Show, Multiple Genders in Judaism. Oh. This is weird. Okay. Teresa says, Shalom from Cyprus. Glad to see you here, Teresa, and welcome to the Jew Curious Show. Teresa's been one of our supporters of this community from way back. Really glad to see you here, Teresa. So let's get started here in just a moment. Want to say all prompts to Teresa for showing up, for Cara Amelie. I say Cara, I don't know if it's Cara. My wife is you told me this before, but I forgot. I'm embarrassed. My wife is a Cara, and she says, people say Cara. She corrects them. She's like, that's not my name. KG Wilcox is here. Cara Amelie is here. K Dixie, Michael Pacheco. It's either. God bless you for your magnanimity. So I'm going to turn down the tunes here. Turn down the Pretzel Rocks. It's a little app I have here on Streamlabs OBS. If you're for all your fine live streaming needs, it's a great free app. Only on the PC platform though, which is kind of bugging me a little bit. But Pretzel Rock's going to turn that off, and let's get into the show. As one of my teachers, Gary Vaynerchuk, says, CJ Mays 28. Well, very glad to have you here, CJ Mays. Shalom. Well, Rabbi John, it's official. I'm planning to withdraw from my PhD program to do Jewish community work and apply for HUC Rabbinical School next year. Awesome. So I'm assuming that's, I don't want to encourage people from stopping PhD programs, but if that's the right decision for you, I'm really proud of you. That takes a lot of courage. And if you're going to rabbinical school, your courage ain't done, friend. I'll tell you what. I mean, I had a blast. It was, 5 years full-time school plus working plus family, and I'm not going to lie to you, it was a bit of a grind, it is not for everyone. But if this is your path, if this is your calling, if this is your well-reasoned career decision, one or all of those things, jump right into it. Know that you have my full support, and feel free to ping me at any time because there's some hard days there in seminary. So if you get discouraged, just reach out to me, and I'll give you what advice and encouragement I can. Mostly, it's just a big. I can't. That's not a polite word to use on the internet. So I was going to say something that starts with mind and ends with a verb, but in any case, it's well worth it. But in all cases, Mazel Tov, CJ May, for this momentous decision. You know, that's reminded in the words of Tony Robbins. I don't know if he's your jam, you know, certain get some controversy around that guy, but he just says every wonderful, meaningful thing that happens in your life often just about everyone begins with a decision, you know, a singular moment of decision. Even if it's unintended consequences, it began with a decision. And so making a decision like this is huge. So good on you. Well, let's get into it. I was inspired by yesterday's conversation was sort of an Ask Me Anything. Got some questions on gender in Judaism, and it reminded me of some recent learning I did about the different genders that are recognized in classical rabbinic literature. And this kind of blows some people's minds. I mean, walking around, many people kind of have that binary framework of gender in their head. Like you're either male or female. There's nothing in between. There's nothing else. You're pretty, you know, whatever you're born is sort of should be stable through life. And anything that doesn't fit that, you know, cis man or cis woman, however you want to call it, designation is an aberration to be avoided, shunned, repressed, whatever. And that's one way to look at the world. It's increasingly not the way I look at the world, especially the more people I meet who don't fit into these neat little boxes and who have experienced great pain in their life because other people expect them to fit in these boxes, or they internalized these boxes throughout their life, even if it didn't fit them. And now people are working through that pain, and I don't want to encourage pain, but I'll say, thank God that it has opened more and more people's eyes to a broader way of looking at the world. The world is really slow to catch up to this, but I'll say this isn't a new thing, having multiple genders, and it's not even a new thing in Judaism, which from the outside looks like, and even from the inside in some places, looks like a very gender binary place with a lot of rules and traditions and regulations and customs that reinforce that binary view, that sort of very rigid binary view of gender, right? There are men, there are women. Men have certain things they must and can do. Women have certain things that they must and can do, and never the twain shall intersect. In fact, there are whole segments of the Jewish population that seems like most of what distinguishes them is how strictly they enforce these rules. However, historically speaking, this is not how Judaism has always been. And the more we look into our primary texts, secondary text. Primary text is Torah, but when we get into the Mishnah and the Talmud and things like that, going back, written down 1,800 years, but that writing down 1,800 years ago of the Mishnah was actually a recording of oral tradition and argument going back several hundred years before that. So let's say over 2,000 years, rabbis and scholars and other people in the Jewish community have been talking about this much more diverse view of gender. And I think we could learn a lot from that kind of broad-mindedness. So I wanted to give you kind of an introduction to that today. And we can, again, my goal today is just to sort of give you an introduction, share some of my perspective and some recent learnings on this, and then encourage you to do more research and ask questions. And I'll say, like, I don't have all the answers. This is something that I'm learning about today more and more, like literally every day. Somebody asked me a great question online last night about her particular situation and looking into the struggles that she faces really broadened my perspective on what it means to be, say, a trans person in the world today and in the Jewish world. today and sparked me to do further learning. And so I'm still evolving in my perspective. But I think there are, or I should say, I think this isn't, again, we're not inventing a new way of being Jewish here. We're not inventing new gender identities here. We have the technology, like we have the Torah going back centuries, if not millennia, to help us understand our world better, to help us understand each other better, and to help increase kindness and justice in the world, especially where it is sorely lacking among ignorance and prejudice. So let's get into it. And there are some other great articles out there I'll refer you to as well. A great way to find some of these resources is just to Google multiple genders Judaism, and you'll find a ton of articles on this issue from places like mygewishlearning.com. There's an article in the Jewish Telegraph Agency, several articles on this. And I'll also refer briefly to the work of Rabbi Ethan Tucker, who talks about egalitarianism and gender roles from a perspective of Halacha, from Jewish law. And, learned guy, halachic scholar, has a view of halachic treatment of gender that I think is very broad-minded, may blow some minds out there, but again, he takes it from the approach of not innovating halacha necessarily. For him, halacha or Jewish law is not changing. It's the times that change and the lens with which we view that law that opens up new possibilities for more and more people to embrace and engage with the covenant. So let's jump into it. Ooh, got a little frog in the pipes. I think that's left over from Egypt, that one plague there. Got some frogs in the pipes. All right, let's jump into it. So very broadly speaking, in a review of Mishnah and Talmud, we see identified 6 different genders that are discussed, illuminated, what have you, each one of which, when it talks about the responsibilities and the rights of different genders and things like that, there are between dozens and hundreds of references to each of these 6 things, beyond each of these 6 categories, let's say, in the Mishnah and the Talmud and other literature itself. And so we can delve into these, but that's just sort of proof that this is something that's been talked about for a very long time. And these are the 6. And I'll give these categories. In my mind, each of these represents certain points along a spectrum, with wherein one can recognize, and one can even recognize in oneself, sort of spaces in between. So this isn't to say, hey, we used to force you into 2 boxes, now we force you into 6 boxes. It could be multiple sort of places along the way, spectrums, variations. My training before rabbinical school was in economics and academic, scientific finance, in the sense of recognizing things not always coming in discrete numbers or means, but also standard deviations and kurtosis and things like that. Every point on a probability distribution has its own probability distribution around it, but not to get technical there. Let's see. Cara Amelie says, lol, those are some long-lived frogs. They were miracle frogs. What do you expect? Okay, so here are the 6 categories that are discussed in classical rabbinic literature, by which I mean the Mishnah and the Talmud, and these are nekeva, which means feminine, somebody who was born with, don't know how to say this in a better way, someone who was born expressing a female gender, meaning identifiable parts, let's say, and sort of and that's stable throughout her life. So that's nekeva is female. Zachar is male, someone born identifiably male for whom a male identity is stable. There is a category recognized called androgynos, which is a an Aramaic transliteration of a Greek loan word. You might recognize the term androgynous in there. Has andro and gyno in it, which means somebody who's born with both sets of expressed gender characteristics or sex characteristics, a penis and a vagina. We'll just say it. We're all grown-ups here probably. So there's female, there's male, there's both, and there is what is described as a tumtum, and this is somebody who is born sort of asexually without identifiable characteristics, and for whom that identity is stable. So that's four. We got female, nekeva, male, zachar, androgynos, which is both male and female, and tumtum, which is neither. So beyond that, there are two more categories. There is an elonit, which is someone who is sort of assigned or observed as female at birth, but in adulthood appears or expresses a male identity. So that's elonit. And then the last of these six is called saris, someone who is born with male characteristics or visibly male or assigned a male gender at birth, who in adulthood expresses female characteristics or identifies as female. So just to review, we've got nekeva, female, zachar, male, androgynos, both, tumtum, neither, elonit, sort of we'll say trans men, and saris, trans women. So these are the six categories that have among them either dozens or hundreds of references in the Mishnah and the Talmud describing their roles in society, their responsibilities in society, responsibilities for prayer, things like that. And this is where a lot of, let's say, gender conversations happen in the Mishnah and the Talmud and in later halakhic literature about, okay, based on your gender, do you have assignments of obligation for mitzvot, for prayer? What are you obligated to do? What are you allowed to do in the community? And those sorts of things. Just want to give a shout out to Trigger Sniv, who has joined us. Better late than never, she says, but always happy to have you, Trig, whenever you can join us. And before we get into questions, and feel free to throw in whatever questions you have here. I'm going to transition a little bit into talk about gender in, let's say, religious responsibility, current thinking on egalitarianism, and things like that. Before I do, just a quick pause for station identification. This is the Jew Curious Show. We have been a podcast for about a year now. For the last few months, we've been doing some live chats and live discussions on YouTube, and now we are firmly entrenched in the Twitch platform, just because I think this is a superior platform for live streaming and live conversations with people. Also, as far as I can tell, we are the first and, for the time being, only channel devoted to Jewish learning on the Twitch platform, which is mostly devoted to live streaming of video games. Not knocking it. That's where some of the best technology is for live streaming. It just happens that I think this is a great way for us to hang out. And of course, this is something I love about this community. Kay Dixie says, "Hey Trig, glad to see you." Trig says, "Good morning." You know, feel free not to just chat with me, but chat with each other. This is the nicest group of people I've ever had the privilege of doing Jewish learning with. So very friendly. Nobody's going to hassle you or troll you. If they do, my friends here know I am quick on the ban hammer. Boy, somebody come, boy, howdy. Now, did I say boy, not to make gender assignments, but to betray my Texas roots. Boy, howdy. If somebody comes in here trolling it up, saying anti-Semitic things or being mean to people in the chat, I'm just like, kaboom, ban you. So, not to get too aggro here, but I feel strongly about this. I will also say, just to throw in another, let's say, request, endorsement, what have you, if you like the people you hang out with here, a great way to connect with people in general is joining the Jew Curious Community Center. You may wonder what I mean by Jew Curious. Like Jew Curious, this is what I call people who are curious about Judaism wherever they're coming from. Some people are on the path to conversion, want to learn more about what they're getting themselves into. Some people have been Jewish their whole lives, but are still curious about sort of why we do the things that we do. There are folks who are not remotely interested in being Jewish. Let's say I've met a lot of people who are really serious about being Christians and want to know more about the Hebrew roots of their own faith, or just spiritual seekers. You're trying on a few different paths and seeing what's right for you, and you're curious about Judaism. If any of these describes you, you, my friend, are in the right place. And if you want to meet other people just like you, I highly recommend you go to the Jew Curious Community Center. You just find that by going to jewcurious.show/JCC, as in Jew Curious Community Center, and you can get hooked up with a private Facebook group online, lovingly tended, carefully guarded, troll-free zone to just let your hair down, ask your questions in a safe space, meet some people who are on a similar path. So let's see, we got an automod held message for, let's see, this is a new thing on me. I got this little flash up that says, automod held message for reason identity allow. We'll post a chat. CJ Mays says, by the way, if anyone is more interested, Abby Stein has an autobiography coming out this fall. You can pre-order. She is a trans woman who came out of the ultra-Orthodox world. So I think this got flagged in the chat because it's promoting something. That's totally okay with me. So I'm going to hit the allow button. As Trigger says, we are all here to protect each other. So true. All right. So what is K Dixie says, the female body is nature's default. If the hormones aren't properly functioning in the early stages, an XY male baby can be born without male parts, looking mainly female. So, we're understanding more and more about the biology of things, and people come out with all sorts of arrangements of chromosomes. And yet, something about our society has pushed people into boxes for the sake of simplicity, for the sake of stability. But whenever you try to push something into a peg that's not you push a peg into a hole that's not the right shape, there can be trauma, right? There can be exclusion. There can be hard feelings. There can be physical problems. There could be crime. There could be unkindness. And so I think the more and more we understand the multiplicity of identities and understand that they're all included in that statement that humanity is all created in God's image and deserves inherent dignity as such, the more people can access the covenant with God that we have and increase peace and justice and kindness in the world. So thank you all for being here. I want to give trying to think how far back to go on this one. I was going to give a little preface on patriarchy in Judaism. Well, maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But I want to share with you some learning that I've been doing, not with, guys never met me, but from Rabbi Ethan Tucker, who's been writing on gender in Judaism, egalitarianism, things like this, how the Jewish legal literature of Halacha has divided the rights and responsibilities of men and women historically, and how we can take a look at those things differently today. And I'll just give you kind of a quick summary of this idea because I'm still learning from him. I haven't read like all of his books or essays on this, but I intend to. Just a quick overview of his argument is that insofar as Jewish law differentiates between the rights and responsibilities of men and women, for example, counting women in a minyan, for example, having women lead prayer services, and is there a different right or responsibility there from men leading prayer services? This mostly, comes into play into a lot of Orthodox synagogues where only men are counted in a minyan, counted for that prayer quorum of 10. And if you want to know why it's 10, take a look at this week's Parsha, and certainly tune in tomorrow. We're going to be talking about this week's Parsha tomorrow on this show at 9 a.m. That's Thursday, where we get the idea of minyan from, and it's from someplace you might not expect. So tune in tomorrow for that. But in any case, in many Jewish communities, women are not counted in that quorum of 10 needed for certain prayers. Women are not permitted to read Torah in public, meaning like chant it out for everybody to hear. Anybody can open a book, but chanting it in public. Women are not allowed to lead prayer services, meaning be a shaliach tzibor, sort of the person leading prayers for everybody who's praying there. And this is based on assignment of gender roles going into the Shulchan Aruch and other halachic literature. But Rabbi Tucker's argument is that this isn't native to a discussion of gender per se, but is more a reflection of class and power status in a community. The notion being that those people in a community who have the most power also have the highest level of responsibility in that community, right? The people who are kind of on top of the food chain or on top of the pyramid, the hierarchy, whatever you want to call it, have the greatest obligation for prayer, mitzvot, and things like that. And another aspect of praying on behalf of someone, that means, representing the community in a minyan, that means leading prayer that other people say amen to, is that the person who's leading prayer should be what they call maximally obligated. Like the person leading prayer should be at least as obligated to say that prayer as everybody else in the room if the person's going to pray on behalf of the others. So the argument being that in a culture, community, village, what have you, where women have less power, they also have less obligation to pray, which means they can't pray on other people's behalf because they're not as responsible as the people of higher power. Now, if this sounds like BS to you, I'm not going to argue with you. But I think this revelation that it's not inherent to that capacity to pray on behalf of others is not inherent to male or female, but rather inherent to power structures, helps us understand the halakhic framework regarding gender in a different way. Before it's like, okay, if you're a man, you have to pray it 3 times a day, and if you're a woman, you don't. But to count in a minyan, you have to be obligated to pray 3 times a day, and since women don't, they don't have that role in society. However, if the decision about who counts and who can lead is based on status and not on biology, then once we are in a culture where status isn't determined by biology, then halakhic responsibility and leadership is no longer tied to the biology of gender per se. And this, again, this is a little bit inside baseball, but I think what he's doing is opening up a framework whereby, now that, and I know it's not equal all over, I know we've got a long way to go, I know people are still going through a lot of pain on this score, but the argument he's making is that if we recognize that women have equal status and equal power in a culture, we have to recognize that they also have equal obligation and right to count in a minyan, lead prayer, anything that a man would be able to do. So this is a new kind of framework, or new to me anyway. He's actually takes great pains, Rabbi Tucker takes great pains to show where all this fits into classical rabbinical literature, especially in the Talmud. When we have the Shulchan Aruch of the Middle Ages, it says very clearly, men do this stuff, women do this stuff. And so people say, hey, how can you possibly just toss out the Shulchan Aruch? And he says, no, this Shulchan Aruch, I'm not tossing it out. I'm saying that the Shulchan Aruch, which was a dude, right? It was one guy writing all of this stuff. Well, it was actually a couple of guys, because the Shulchan Aruch as a person was Rav Yosef Karo, and then there's the addition of the voice of Rav Moshe Isserlis, probably equally sexist from his time. But he's saying this presentation of Jewish law was a snapshot of its time and place. And in that snapshot, women held lower status, lower power in their communities, were categorically lumped in with children and slaves, or children and people who didn't have control over their schedule, and so that's where that gender differentiation came from, right? Prayer was something for high status free people to do, and if women were not high status free people, then they were not included in that. And I hope I don't, any errors are mine here. I think what Rabbi Tucker is saying is that in that snapshot, yes, that fit that community. However, That wasn't how it always was, going back into the time of the Talmud and Mishnah, and it's not how it needs to be today necessarily. So this is a couple of different ideas. First, I wanted to lay out for you what are the multiple genders that we see, what is a way of looking at Jewish law, Jewish rights, Jewish responsibility that untethers obligation to the mitzvot from gender identity per se to open up the rights and responsibilities of all Jews to all of the multiple genders that are presented in the rabbinic framework. So my goal today was not just to explain, what are these 6 genders and, of course, the spectrum in between them and among them, but to state very clearly, at least according to my understanding of Rabbi Tucker's work, that everyone counts. Adults, let's say every adult counts. I mean, there's something to maturity, and there's something to being a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, of reaching legal majority. But once you've reached legal majority, once you've reached a level of understanding of your own responsibility, those responsibilities are not then further determined by your gender identity, whichever of the 6 that it is, or anywhere in between. To state very clearly that you can pray, you can read Torah, you can count in it. There's going to be a lot of rabbis who disagree with me about this, but you can pray, you can lead prayer, you can read Torah in public, you can hold any position of authority within a religious community, regardless of whether you are nekeva, female, zachar, male, androgynos, tumtum, elonit, or a trans man, saris, trans woman, whatever. And not all communities are open to this. You may have to shop around a little bit. And I'm sorry that that's still the case, but working on it, let's say. Promoting a Judaism that recognizes that wherever people are within and among these gender categories, you have equal access to the covenant. You have an equal invitation to engage in Torah, to engage in Jewish community. And you have an equal obligation, let's say, to work for a world of kindness and peace and justice. So that's what I wanted to get across today. Not only just a kind of a description of these multiple genders, but B, an endorsement of the notion of complete egalitarianism and a complete equality, not just among men and women, but among all the genders recognized by classical Judaism, and probably beyond that in ways that we're just beginning to understand. So I really appreciate everybody doing some learning today. Let me see if there are any questions here in the chat. Michael Pacheco says, so if this issue is directly addressed in the Mishnah, how is it that the more frum world seems to manage to ignore it while simultaneously being grumpy that more liberal Jews choose not to follow other parts of the Mishnah and the Talmud? So let's say I have multiple opinions on that question. I'm going to take a little sip of coffee here to stall while I gather my thoughts. So I think there are a couple of different reasons for this. I think there's kind of a technical reason and a more societal reason. I'll go with the societal reason. I was kind of hesitated to go this far back in history, but here goes. It's just based on some recent studies I've been doing of, let's say, pre-Jewish history, and getting into Will Durant. I know some people don't care for Will Durant's biases and seems anti-Semitic here and there. However, was a historian that covered different eras of history, and when he's talking about let's say prehistory and things like that, and the kind of evolution of settled agrarian or pastoral society, and then the further development of cultures beyond that, talks about the idea that, let's say, when the bulk of humanity were hunter-gatherers, at least what we can gather from scant archaeological evidence, but also observations of recent or present hunter-gatherer cultures today, we can see that hunter-gatherer cultures were by and large not patriarchal. In fact, they trended more matriarchal in the sense that men's responsibility was to hunt and to fight. Most of their time was leisure time, resting up or recovering between hunting and fighting. and that most of the calories that were consumed by a family came not from the hunting but from the gathering aspect of it, and that was primarily work that women did, just based on different strengths. Men were on average better for hunting and fighting, and women were on average better for digging stuff up out of the ground. And so women actually had more control over those, over what happened in the tribes back then. There's evidence of, I want to say, Iroquois settlements where women pretty much voted and had the say on everything, held all property in common, and if men needed a piece of property, a plow or a arrowhead or something, or some kind of supplies, they had to go to the Council of Women to get that. Property, such as it was, there's less property going around when you're hunter-gatherer and nomadic, because you got to carry everything in a backpack. But property, such as it was largely handed down maternally. With the advent of, let's say, first nomadic pastoral life, meaning raising livestock as a stable source of calories, and then settled farming and things like that, with sort of the advent of culture that comes from agriculture and leisure and having food left over for tomorrow, things shifted. And the more we shifted from hunting and gathering to farming, then we see societies becoming more patriarchally determined, meaning men were doing a lot of the plowing and things like that, and doing the farming and providing a lot of the calories, etc. And there were then asserting more control over women and children and things like that, as seen as labor for the farming. And then property was passed, now that there was some property, meaning there was land and plows and horses and cows and things like that, things were passed down patriarchally, right? So societies, by and large, became more and more patriarchal before Judaism came on the scene, before Judaism was a thing, right? And we see that Abraham was largely a nomadic pastor, I guess that's the word. He was like a herdsman for the most part. Then we see Isaac settling down and farming. But Judaism was a patriarchal society from its inception. And so then that's how it's been for a very, very long time. And among the communities that Michael's asking about, let's say the more traditional, less liberal communities that like to change as slowly as possible, I believe that the interpretation of Jewish law that they're applying has more to do with preserving patriarchal status and power than it has to do with an equal recognition of women as human beings. That's my perspective. And so I'm sure there are Orthodox people and other traditional, call themselves traditional Jews who will disagree with me about that. But I think this has a lot more to do with status and power within family structures, within community, than it has to do with Jewish law per se. And so these tend to be more small c conservative communities that change more slowly over time. And so when they say that liberal Jews are picking and choosing between things that they find in the Mishnah and the Talmud, I could make the counter argument that that people who are, let's say, erring on the side of gender inequality are picking and choosing the aspects of Judaism historically that serve that power structure. Not to, and I don't want to rob anybody of their sense of tradition or anything like that, but that's my hypothesis. So, Michael Pacheco, also, can you link to the book by Rabbi Tucker? So I'll find, let's see, I don't have that at my fingertips now, but maybe I'll put some stuff up in the Jew Curious Community Center so that people can have access to that. I've mostly been reading articles of his online, not his latest book on the topic, which I hope to get into very soon. So the other piece of it is, when in the halachic framework, especially among Orthodox Jews, tends to eschew tends to move away from making law based on Mishnah and Talmud, but rather making law based on recent halachic literature. This is a principle of posketing or adjudicating Jewish law within the Orthodox world that says, we don't go back to the Mishnah and Talmud or even the Torah to make decisions about Jewish law today. We look at the most recent halachic literature, which for them is more the Shulchan Aruch and forward of legal decisors in the Orthodox world. Part of the criticism among Orthodox halachic scholars of conservative halacha is that in conservative halacha, while we do rely very heavily on Shulchan Aruch, more recent legal cases and things like that, we do look back into the Talmud and the Mishnah for helping to guide interpretations of Jewish law today. And so, if you're only looking at the most recent literature within the Orthodox world, this notion of multiplicity of genders and the rights and responsibilities thereof and thereto are going to be invisible to you, which is okay if you want to preserve a patriarchal framework and differentiation between men and women. Now, I say that knowing that there are lots of moves being made right now within the Orthodox world for greater egalitarianism, for greater respect and regard for women and their leadership role. There are more and more women being ordained, as it were, or given smicha as scholars of Jewish law, as rabbis, as different titles there too. And so I don't want to paint Orthodoxy with such a broad brush that would be inaccurate to say that there aren't people who are looking at gender issues in a halakhic framework differently than maybe people were 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. So let's see who's in the chat. Trigger Snip share. Let's see. I just saw something in here I wanted to take a look at. Kathy is sharing with Trig. Left is the ladies' side when there is divided seating, at least in the Chabad where I visited. Sometimes it's on the left side. Sometimes it's up in the balcony. There, many places preserve divided seating between men and women, and that's their custom that they are loath to change. And so I'm not going to force change on them. I will say if this is a system of divided seating, if this doesn't work for you, there are lots of Jewish communities out there that don't maintain this system. So go where you're comfortable. Go where you feel the most bonds with people. Go where the learning is the best. Go where you feel seen, right? And some people feel seen in non-egalitarian spaces and prefer it for many reasons, and that's okay. I'm not saying that this is wrong, but I'm also not saying that it's categorically and exclusively right. My encouragement for Jew-curious people, insofar as you're interested in being part of Jewish communities, is go to places that you enjoy and that you feel seen and respected. That may take some shopping around. You may live in a place where where multiple options are not available to you. And, I can't tell you what to do about that exactly, other than to look at the broader world and see maybe there's some online communities where you feel more comfortable. Maybe, God willing, you have the opportunity to move in the future or choices between places to move, and maybe you seek out a place that has more diversity. This gets into a lot of questions that I have myself and that other people have for me, teaching people about Judaism who don't have access to Jewish communities where they can fit in. Am I doing people a disservice? Is this an injustice to encourage people to learn about Judaism where they literally can't join physical communities? And I'm not going to tell people that they have to get up and move, but my reason for doing this is, with the internet, you shouldn't be shut out from being able to learn about Jewish stuff. And I want you to be prepared so that, God willing, maybe someday you have the opportunity to be in a physical community with other people like you. You will be knowledgeable and prepared when you join that community. So that's just a decision that I've made as far as teaching more expansively than may have been done in the past. So listen, everybody, I really appreciate this discussion that we've had today. I'll hang out for everybody to see if anybody has any questions about this. take a little pause to check any comments on YouTube or Facebook that I might have missed. But first, I'm going to say hi to Christy Scroggs, who's joined us. Hi, everyone. Short break from teaching, just popping by to say hello. Can't wait to watch the replay. Love and shalom. Great to see you, Christy. Christy coming in from San Bernardino, California, as far as I know. I think that's where you're from. So welcome, everybody, here. Just a quick pause for station identification while I check the comments on Facebook and YouTube. This here is the Jew Curious show. This is a show for Jew curious people of all kinds, where I'm always here to answer whatever questions you have and encourage you to meet other Jew curious people just like you. So let's take a look. Let's see. Let's take a look at the live video, see if there's any... We got some people watching over on Facebook. Mary Linda Schwartzbart, so good to see you. Mary Linda and her husband Arnold, Alava Shalom, are part of my yichus. I feel like, says greetings from Knoxville, Tennessee. So yes, one of my shortly after I joined the Jewish family, my family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and Knoxville, Tennessee is where I'll say I learned how to be a Jew. Like I just started going to Morning Minyan, hanging out with people there, including Mary Linda and Arnold, and just really shaped who I am today. I don't think I'd be the Jew that I am. I certainly wouldn't be the rabbi that I am had it not been for the love and kindness of the Knoxville, Tennessee Jewish community. Specifically, shout outs to Heska Amuna Synagogue. So glad to see you here. Great to see you, Fred and Drake Clark. Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Aleichem Shalom, Drake. Glad to see you. Let's go over to YouTube. I'm going to get a hang of this multicasting. Maybe I'll get these monitors up everywhere. Look like the NASDAQ, etc. Let's see. Kay Dixie says, Shalom, Teresa. Many of us are listening on Twitch TV. Bala S says, is it closed? Let's see. I am teaching most of Old Testament subject in seminary. What is the best way to describe the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament or First Testament? What is the difference between Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews? So I'm glad I saw this over here. Look, I'll say in the context of... So I'm not an expert on Christianity, far from it. Sometimes I think I'm barely an expert on Judaism, but I'll say that if you're teaching what came before the New Testament in a Christian context, I think it's legitimate to call it the Old Testament, right? Because whatever seminary you're in, you're part of a denomination or a movement that has a canon, and that canon includes the New Testament and whatever is before it. And so, and I say this knowing that among different Christian denominations, what the canon includes in what they call the Old Testament is different between, let's say, Catholics and Protestants, or Orthodox Christians and non-Orthodox Christians. And so, call it what you will according to your denomination, but understand that Jews don't call it the Old Testament. Sometimes I joke and I just say, for us, it's just the Testament, but we don't really call it that. And it's also different from, what we have canonized in our Bible, in our sort of scripture or text, what have you, what we refer to as the Tanakh, which is an acronym for Torah, Ketuvim, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, or the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. What we have canonized in this body of work is not the same as the Old Testament. I think I forget exactly, there's some denominations where what they include in the Old Testament is the same books nominally as what we include in the Tanakh. But that's not true across all branches of Christianity. So when we read our scriptures, we call it the Tanakh again, and it's, if you want to spell that in English, it's Tanakh. If you want to learn more about that, I've got a video about that on YouTube. Just type in Tanakh, and you'll probably see a video I made. It's about 90 seconds long on what is Tanakh. So we refer to it as the Tanakh, sometimes the Hebrew Bible, just because that's the Bible for the Hebrew people. Part of our canonization process is that for the most part we only include books that were originally written in Hebrew. As some exceptions, like Daniel has a lot of Aramaic in it. We do not include books that were probably originally written in Greek. And I think the Maccabees gets into that. So you won't find the books of the Maccabees, for example, in the Tanakh. I think it's the Maccabees that was written in Greek. So, we call it the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. When we say Torah, it's kind of confusing because when we say Torah, we could be referring to the first 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Or sometimes we use the word Torah to talk about the entire corpus of sacred literature. So that can be confusing. So I would say if you're teaching everything before the New Testament, you can call it the Old Testament if you're including what's in your canon. But if you want to refer to what Jews study as a holy book, I would call it the Hebrew Bible, or the Tanakh is more accurate than Old Testament, at least from our perspective. So let's see. Another great question. What's the difference between Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews? Which is a wonderful question. Let's see. Sophie Marie Hazen showed up. Hey, Rabbi Carrier. Good to see you, Sophie. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Let's see. Just to answer Bala S's other question. What's the difference between Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews? There's some overlapping circles, I'll say, because just in my mind, sometimes I refer to people from, let's say, biblical and biblical times, not so much as Jews, because the word Jew is a later word. I mean, this is a word you could probably say comes from Latin for Judea was the province of Canaan that was governed by the Roman Empire. So it was like Iudea, something like that, Judea, because they don't have a J sound in that language. And then that Judeo or Judean from Latin transformed into Jew, mostly through Germanic languages that use the J letter to symbolize the Y sound. So Juda, in German means a Judean or somebody from that province. Roughly speaking, Jewish people. But I often don't use the word, when I use the word Jew, it's to distinguish sort of modern day Jewish people, or historically going back to, say, the time of the Roman exile. But because before that, we weren't called Jews. Before that, we were considered Hebrews or Bnei Yisrael. If you want to be strictly, historically speaking, somewhat more accurate, because this goes into prehistory, which is kind of hard to say. I often think of Hebrews as the people who existed before, let's say, the enslavement in Egypt, right? This was a group of people that was around before we went into Egypt. It was only after leaving Egypt that within the Torah itself, it starts referring to us as Bnei Yisrael, which in a literal sense it means the descendants of Jacob, who, through a little wrestling match got a new name. Look it up in the Bible. Jacob became Yisrael. And before, there wasn't so much talk of the Hebrews. We're not called the Hebrews in the scripture itself. We're just sort of Abraham and his family and descendants. Once we leave Egypt, we are referred to as Bnei Yisrael, meaning literally the descendants of Jacob, or one could argue the figurative descendants of Jacob as well, or the inheritors of Yisrael. Yisrael is this name that means the one who wrestled with God. And so in my mind, Bnei Yisrael, like the name is Yisrael or Israelites, like Israelite is a translation of Bnei Yisrael, refers to, on the one hand, genetic descendants of this person, but not just genetic, because even from the time of leaving Egypt, we had an Erev Rav going out. We had an Erev Rav going out with us, like a mixed multitude, and anyone who joined this people were considered a part of this people, and just as much descendants of Avram Avinu or Abraham as anybody else. And so if you see Yisrael as being the one who struggled with God, the one who struggled, as the angel says that he wrestles with, the one who struggles with humans and the divine and succeeds, then you can see Bnei Yisrael or Israelite as being both the literal inheritors, like the genetic inheritors, and those who inherit the struggle, right? Those who carry forth in this intimate act of engaging in the covenant. And so that's where, so just to distinguish between Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew. Hebrew is sort of an ethnic description of these tribes of people that coalesced into Abraham and his progeny. Israelite is what we're called sort of from the time we leave Egypt until throughout the rest of our history up until the Roman occupation of Judea. And in the Roman occupation of Judea, we get this name Judeans. We become Judeans, which is just a small subset of who we were. And then that translates into later European languages as Judah or Jew. So that's probably more than you asked, but hey, when don't I? So let's see what are the questions we have here. Let's see. Trying to pronounce this word. Genocide. Let's see how this goes. Somebody named Genocide on the chat. I'll read this. Let's see. I briefly knew a devout Jewish guy. It was during work, and he would put on some podcast about a rabbi. After listening to it for a bit, my impression was that the religion is extremely based in humility and requires its followers to practice humility to extremes. So I'll own that. I know about one person's extreme is another person's zeal. So let's see. Similar to how Christianity tries to encourage self-sacrifice and forgiveness to an extreme. So I'll own that. I think humility is considered an admirable Jewish quality. Moses himself was considered to be, just as Abraham was considered to be sort of a paragon of faith, Moses, for all of his power and influence in connection to God, was seen as a paragon of humility. And much of what we do has to do with humility. The head, like the covering of our heads, is a sign of humility before God, for example. So Kay Dixie says, although it sounds Yiddish, yichus is actually a Hebrew word meaning lineage, distinguished birth or pedigree. Very good. Let's see. Gender. Great. Kay Dixie shared a name of Rabbi Ethan Tucker's work, Gender Equality and Prayer in Jewish Law, by Rabbi Ethan Tucker and Rabbi Michael Rosenberg, came out in 2017. So that's a great link. I think Michael Pacheco was asking for that. Thank you, Kay Dixie, for looking that up. Cara Amelie asked a second ago, what does yichus? I said yichus because I said Knoxville, Tennessee was a part of my yichus, or yichus, more particularly. Yichus means provenance, I'll say. Proven, not providence, but provenance as where something came from. So sometimes it's described as pedigree or, yichus in the sense of somebody is from a good family, that person's got yichus, or somebody firmly rooted in where they came from. I'll say my yichus is I'm a Texan. That's a strong part of my yichus as a Southerner, but also as a Jew, my yichus is sort of in the South as well, in Knoxville, Tennessee. So Michael Pacheco says, so in a super poetic way, a convert becomes an Israelite via the process of struggling with God during the discernment and education process. I'll say, and here's the thing. It's not, I think that's a really great way to put it, Michael. I'll raise you. I'll see your wager and raise you, or just add to that by saying, one becomes an Israelite not by struggling and winning, but by committing to the struggle, if the distinction makes sense for you, in the sense that, it's not I struggle with whether I should be Jewish and I win when I figure out I should be. It's more like, the nature of being Jewish is a nature of struggle, is a nature with being in, just sort of committing to that lifelong struggle with trying to balance what God wants from us and balancing the needs of a human life. And that is a constant struggle. And the struggle is harder for some people than others. Some people say, well, I'm just going to live by the Shulchan Aruch and everybody else can go jump in a lake. For me, that's less of a struggle because you've already stopped fighting. Or if somebody says, I'm a gastronomic Jew or a cultural Jew, I'm not really that interested in what the religion has to say, it may be less of a struggle because you've already kind of given up that fight. But I'll say between those two poles, and at different points in a person's life, like I'm not resigning either of these guys to, that they're always that way. I think within a Jewish life, we are invited to engage in this struggle with those two equally important, equally powerful urges between our human nature and our divine nature. And a Jewish life, for me, fully lived, is walking between those two gravitational poles and trying to figure out a way that embraces all aspects of my character, as well as be a kind person to my family and my coworkers and things like that. That's where the real struggle is where we perceive a difference between what God wants, excuse me, and what our family wants from us, or what our job wants from us. And I believe that balances can be struck, but never easily. So for me, becoming Jewish isn't about struggling with something and succeeding. If you remember, Jacob's battle ended in a draw. It's about committing to that struggle and being okay with being uncomfortable while you're going through that struggle. So I hope that's helpful. Genocide says struggle isn't unique to Judaism. I don't think it is either. So I'm not really stating that. I don't think it's unique to Judaism, but I think it is inherent in Judaism, and what Judaism is a struggle. That's another, I think, attractive feature of Judaism is that unlike other faiths, we don't go around saying that we're the only right path. There are, fundamentalist groups within our people who think this is the one right way to live, and everybody else is, less than. But we've got fundamentalists just like everybody else does. I think by and large, Judaism recognizes that we are one people with a particular covenant with God, but we are not God's only people, and this is not the only covenant that's out there. And so for me, that seems to be a more humane way to live in a diverse world. So as K. Dixie shares, and all right, we're on the topic of this week's Torah portion. Seems like the 10 spineless spies didn't want to struggle. Well, it's clear, like they thought they would lose, and the other two spies thought, yes, this looks like it's going to be a struggle, but God said we should go there, so let's go there. We're scared too, but let's fight. We'll get back into that more tomorrow when we talk about when we talk about the Torah portion of the week. And K. Dixie spells out, when Moses sent 12 spies or scouts to look at the promised land, and 10 came back with a chicken out report. So very well said. Well, I think we're going to wrap up our discussion today. Thank you, Genocide, for joining the conversation. And I'll just say one more word about this particular community and invite you to join us in various aspects. This is a place for anybody who's curious about Judaism and wants to engage in civil conversation is welcome to do so. So whether you're Jewish, not Jewish, considering converting, committed to another religion, but curious about Jewish roots of your own faith, or just a seeker looking for the right path for you, you are more than welcome here. We do many of these chats during the week. Tomorrow we're talking about the Torah portion of the week, which is Shlach Lecha. And so we'll talk about these spies that Kay Dixie's been chatting about, but also where we derive that a minyan or a prayer quorum requires 10 people. And the source of that may surprise you. And of course, on Friday, we're going to have Fun Friday. On Fun Friday is we do the same kind of chat. You ask me whatever questions you want about Judaism while I play a video game live streaming. So it's just Friday. It's just fun. Let's have some fun here. That's Twitch's yichus is video game streaming. So we're going to go there. Last thing I want to say, if you are interested in connecting with other Jew-curious people just like you, this chat's a great place to do it, but kind of if you want to do it when we're not chatting live, a great thing to do is join the Jew Curious Community Center. And you can do that by going to jewcurious.show/JCC. And you register for that. It'll give you all the instructions to join our private, lovingly tended, carefully guarded, troll-free Facebook group where you can meet other Jew-curious people just like you, ask what questions you have, answer other people's questions, support each other in our journey. And once again, it's been my delight to learn with you today. And so it's always my delight to learn with you every day that we learn together. And even when we're not, even when I'm like sleeping and I'm dreaming, I'm thinking, man, there's a bunch of cool people I get to hang out with. So in any case, thanks for joining us today. One last thing, follow us on Twitch, please. We're trying to get to that 50 follower mark, which unlocks all sorts of features for this community. We're at about 38 last time I checked. So if you're watching us on Twitch, look up above the box of my face, and there's a little button that says follow with a picture of a heart on it. Click that button. Join this community. You'll get updates every time we go live. You'll get notified. But more to the point, it helps build this community for the other people here. And this is the first, and I believe still the only outlet of Jewish learning like this on the Twitch platform. So we're breaking new ground. All the more so we need your support. So go ahead and follow this channel. And until next time, heroes, peace.